my name is Francisco. I'm here to give a speech today on what's new in the Product Design and Manufacturing collection in 2021. I'm going to be focusing mainly on Inventor and a little bit of Vault, but I hope you learned something today. So let's just dive right into it. Okay, wonderful. So the first thing that you'll notice when you crank up Inventor Pro is that it won't look much different when you first crank it up. But what you can turn on, if you know where to look, is the dark mode. So if you come to Tools, Application Options, and come to Colors, you can turn on the pre-release ultra experimental and super duper cool dark mode. I have to say, I was a little bit skeptical of this feature when it was first announced, but I'm actually, massively addicted to it, and I would find it very difficult to go back to a light theme. So I definitely recommend giving that a try if you can. So the first thing that we'll have a look at is some UI changes that have been made. So we'll go ahead, we'll start a new part. And what you can see from the get-go is the dark theme that's been applied to it. There's been a large focus on creating a homogeneous user interface, which means creating as many dockable panels as possible. So far, it's included things like the extrusion and the revolution tool and the hole tool, but now it's been expanded to include things like split and thicken. We'll have a quick look at what that looks like. So we'll go ahead, make a quick part, and we'll say center point slot. Very good. I might make a second sketch here. And as you can see, all of the theming that's been done with the sketching has, in 2020, the change to a purple color, I think has been made in preparation for the dark theme, because I have to say it looks fantastic. So I'll just go ahead and make that flat. There you go. And we'll do a sweep. Lovely. Okay, so I'm just going to show you what the split command now looks like, because it's changed quite a bit. I'll go ahead, make a splitting plane. And here, when we click split, you'll notice that the UI has changed drastically. So if you want to undock it, you can still undock it, but we'll use the dock it. So let's go ahead and choose the splitting tool as we normally would. Click there. And here we've got a vastly improved UI. So we can choose individual faces that we want to split as we did in the past, but it's also possible now to click split all faces and it will apply the split to all of it. Now, the first thing you might have noticed, I just undid that, is where has the split solid tool gone? We can see the tools faces, but it's actually hiding here. So we'll just go ahead and pick that tool again. And if you click this solid selection button, it will change the split tool to the solid split function. And here we've got the ability to trim one side or the other, or to keep both of those solids. So there we go. Lovely. Next, what we can do is we've still got the old UI for direct control, but what we can do is use the thicken command. And as you can see, it too is now in a dockable panel. Go ahead here, and we can thicken these things on this solid. Oops, might have been a bit too hasty. Let's try it again. There we go. Lovely. So minor UI tweaks, making it more homogeneous. I think it looks very pretty. So something that's really, really good for usability. So far, we've taken for granted that when you're doing something, say, for example, like a sketch, and you've got a bunch of elements. So say, for example, we've got lines and whatnot. We can use a window selection. That means that, going from left to right, everything that gets fully encapsulated by that box gets selected. Going the other way, anything that touches the box gets selected. They've taken that idea and they've applied it to the selections in the main graphical window. So now, say for example, we want to pick faces, we can use the same window selection feature for faces and edges. If we want to narrow down what we're selecting, we can just say, let's go ahead and pick, say, whole bodies. And here we can apply the same window selection process in the main graphical window. So working from right to left or left to right, we can select bodies now using window selection. Very, very useful. Okay, so I'll close that down. And let's go ahead and open up the next one. So the Unwrapped Tool. So the Unwrapped Tool is surprisingly useful. So for example, you needed to produce a decal that would be a sticker for the outside of this selection. It did work, it was there, but it was a little bit clunky to begin with. But here now, if we click Unwrap, here we can chain select the entire outer face of this shell. And in the past, it would produce the surface, but in a random orientation, a bit uncontrolled. Now we have the opportunity to select a vertex, which we can use to align the sticker, the unwrap. So say, for example, if we wanted it there, or if we wanted it here. And secondly, and I think more importantly, it's possible to allow for rigid inputs. So if we were making a decal for this, this shell, what we need to do is have a rigid input that would select all 4 of these holes to be unstressed holes. So we're going to go ahead and click rigid result, click these 4 circles. There we are. And what we can see is the unwrap wraps itself around, orienting it around those 4 holes so that they're not stressed. Very, very useful. So that's the improvement to the unwrap feature. Next, we'll have a look at the improvements to sheet metal. So here we go. There's an awesome new function in here that allows you to create flanges in a new way. So traditionally, when you've created flanges, you've come along here and you said, yep, let's go ahead, we'll pick that edge there. And say that, for example, we needed to make this flange parallel with this face here. How could we do that? In the past, what we'd have to do is come along with our measure tool, and we'd have to measure that angle, and we'd see 13.81 degrees. And we come along here and say, yep, let's go ahead and say 13.81. Oh, minus 13.81. And yeah, that would be our flange. I think I've measured that wrong. Yeah, that would be our flange angle. However, now we've got a new opportunity to create a flange. We can say, rather than specifying a value, what we can say here is by reference. So this time, let's go ahead and pick the edge that we want to flange. And we can choose a face that we want to use as a reference for that flange angle. So if we click there, we can see now that that flange that got newly created is perfectly in line with that face there. This is one of those looks like nothing, but it's insanely useful features. I'll go ahead and show you a second example of what that looks like. So we'll come along to the second flange here. And say that we need these flanges to meet. We'll say flange. And we'll choose to flange this edge here. And we'll choose that as a reference. And as you can see, what it wants to do is extend this face and then create a flange that's parallel to that face. Very, very useful. So that should improve productivity in the sheet metal environment. Save that. Next, let's have a look at the parametric 3D annotations. So 3D annotations are, oh, this is my dream, baby. I've always wanted to get away from paper. And there would be an ideal perfect world if we could just have a 3D model with all the annotations that you'd need, and somebody with a tablet could spin the model around and take any measurements and see any annotations that they want. But let's have a look at the improvements that have been made in 2021. So we'll come along here and we'll come to the Annotate tab as we do normally. And for anyone that's not familiar with it, here you can add in annotations to the 3D model. They can be anything from general notes. So say, for example, we can say bolted tool or something like that. Here we can put in things like dimensions. So you might say, give me that diameter there. Yep. Or let's say a hole and thread feature. Here we can detail the holes. Extremely useful. But the recent addition that's been made in 2021 is the ability to grab eye properties and parameters and reference them in these annotations. That's fantastic. So I'll do 2 examples here. Here we'll say a leader text, and I'll pick there. And rather than just putting in blah, 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 the material is aluminium, what I can say instead is I can grab the property of the model, and I can grab the material. And by clicking this button here, I can bring it in as an expression, which is fantastic. So there, I've changed it so that it's referencing the material of the part, so stainless steel. So let's go ahead. I might change the material. We'll say brass, soft yellow. Ooh, very nice. And then it changes the annotation accordingly. So what about custom properties? That'd be useful. Let's go ahead and we'll make a new parameter and we'll call it, we'll say surface treatment. There we go. Oops, I've accidentally made that as a number. Let's go ahead, oops, and we'll say add text, surface treatment. And we'll say hot dip galv. Not that you do that for brass, but hey. So let's go ahead back to the annotate tab, and here we'll say leader text. And here, let's go ahead and find model parameters, user parameters, surface treatment. Ooh, and then it references that that parameter that we said. And how about we change our treatment to not hot dip galv? Very technical. And there, it references it automatically. I know that this seems like a little building block for the moment, but I really think it points the way to the future. Full parametric models, hopefully free of the paper, but we'll see. So JT standards. So it should be possible to export this 3D model, not just with its full geometric properties, very poorly annotated by myself here, but we should also be able to have the 3D, these annotations show up in the 3D model when we export it. So here, when we come to our export, we should say CAD format, and we can say JT files, and export that in the JT standard. So that's for data management systems. All right, so wonderful. I'm going to talk a bit too much. Let's move on. Frame generator. So wonderful changes have been made to the frame generator. This is one of those ones that the changes get made, they go under the radar, but are enormously useful. So I'll show you the changes that have been made. Let's go ahead. We'll start a new assembly. And we'll say place. And let's go ahead and place this fancy skeleton that I prepared earlier. And say place it ground. And what we're going to do is use this to make a some kind of some frame using maybe an awkward choice of section. We'll say an L section. L section frame. Lovely. Here we'll come to the design tab. And here we can elect to insert frame. I'm just going to quickly skip over a lot of steps just for the moment to show you something very important. If we were to insert our members there and say OK and OK, these are the default file naming conventions that have been used in Inventor. Here we've got the display name and there we've got the file name. Lots of people have requested different features. So say, for example, they might want the file name to be the same as the display name, or the display name to be same as the GUID generated file name. So if you want to play around with those file naming schemes, and I know a lot of you do, you can come here to Tools, Application Options, come to the File tab, and here we can change the file naming defaults. And this changes a whole bunch of things. So these are the file naming defaults that are used by the frame generator, by tube and pipe, and by the mirror and copy command. So if your company uses a very specific naming convention for, say, mirrored parts, or a very specific naming convention for frame members, you can modify the default naming schemes here. Of course, you can override them after the fact. So let's get back to the frame generator. We'll come along to the design tab and say insert frame. And the first thing that we can notice is that we've got this awesome dockable panel. It looks a lot more in line with the rest of the UI. We'll come along and we'll change it to, did I say it was L section? Yeah, let's make an angle. Asymmetric L is what I'm looking for. L's. And here we'll change the ISO. And Z section. None of that. Unequal leg angles. Perfect. There we go. So let's go ahead. We'll change it to maybe 50 by 30. And we can choose, as we do before, all of our frame members. Now, I want to show you some extra buttons that have been thrown in. Again, they go under the radar. Here we've got different zoom functions. So sometimes you don't know how these members are being oriented. So it might help you. I'll just go ahead and just pick one for the moment to make it a bit easier to see. And if we click the zoom, it will make the camera perpendicular to the frame. And this helps you orient it a little bit better by using the radio buttons that are superimposed on the frame cross-section. You can also use these arrows to create an offset. And as you can see, that directly manipulates this number here. You can also use this arrow here to rotate it. And you can even elect to, say, rotate about the selected point or around the center, depending on your preference. So I'm just going to go ahead and change the offsets to 0, the angles to 0, and show you one more. Say that we do have our angle correct, but it's flipped in the wrong direction. We can use this arrow here to flip the frame about the selected point. So what does that look like in practice? Let's go ahead. We'll go ahead and make this very awkward frame. Go ahead, select those sections. We'll click the zoom button so we can see our orientation, and we might say, okay, I want the frame to be inside the section. And hopefully, for most of it, it will be inside, but we'll have a look. We'll click OK. And you might say, oh, I got some of it right and some of it wrong. So here we can use the change and reuse functions. So let's go ahead, say that I want to change the orientation of this vertical member here. I can click the change button, click the member, and rotate it about. Say that we've got something a little more difficult to angle. So say, for example, we've got, this one, which is poking off at a strange angle. We can click change. And we could, if we wanted to, manually orient it, or we could come along here and say align. And then we can choose a flat surface to which we want to align it. And then we can say, yep, let's go ahead and flip that, or maybe rotate it 180 degrees, then flip it. It's looking pretty good. And so forth, and orient it until you get your frame. So it takes a little bit of time to get all the frame perfect. So here's one that I prepared earlier. Lovely. The sections are a little bit thicker, but I'll show you some of the new features that have been thrown in here. So here we've got our frame interface. And I want to show you something that's really, really super duper important and very cool about the new frame generator in 2021. So say that we need to do a notching. Here we can come along, and the notch tool has been greatly enhanced. Here we can click notch. And here we can pick the frame member that we want to notch and the members that are doing the notching. So we'll pick these two here. As before, we can go ahead and we can add in a gap for welding, so that we want to include a 3mm gap for a weld. But rather than just picking the basic profile, it's also possible, oops, I might have to use a separate frame to show you the different profiles that are now available. So give me a moment. There we can see the notch with the gap available. Very nice. I'll quickly show you though with another frame. Not that one. Maybe that one. There we go. Notch. And it should be possible now to overwrite the basic profile, and we can use an I template for the notching profile, or a C template, or a T template. So here we have greater control over the gap. When we used a basic profile, what we did was we put in a basic offset. So in this case, it was a 3mm gap to allow for welding. But using this different notch profile, you're able to have greater control over the notching. So say, for example, chamfers in the corners, offset from the end, offset from this I-beam section and whatnot. Extremely useful, allows for that finer control over frame sections. So great. I'll go back to our frame. And what we can do here is we can change we can change a number of components. So I'll go ahead and change one of these sections. I might make it a much smaller section size. And say, for example, I didn't have these other ones. I'll go ahead and I'll find this one here and delete it using the frame generator. Might also delete that one. And that one. So my frame is butchered, and what I want to do is I want to turn the sketch on and I want to reuse this member on these other vertical members. What I can do here is change reuse. Oops, sorry, just reuse. Click this section, and now I can hover over all of the frame sections with a compatible section, a compatible skeleton, and I can place down the repeated parts. This is one of those, looks really, really simple, but in fact would save a lot of time in the long run deals. So go ahead, place those down, and then I can orient them as before. So a lot of productivity improvements with the notching, a lot of functionality improvements with the frame generator, and hopefully that should make it more useful for you. So go ahead and close that down. And we'll go over to the next one, tube and pipe. So here we go into the tube and pipe assembly. For those of you not familiar with it, it's possible in Inventor to create tubing and pipe runs. I might show you quickly what that looks like, but then I'll show you the change as we do it that's happened in 2021. So to make a tube and pipe run, we'll come along to environments, and here we can click tube and pipe and click OK. Now, to create a new route, we'll do as we normally do. We'll say new route here. Click OK. And the difference comes here. When we come to making a route, now rather than taking us to a third environment and it being a very convoluted process of nested dropdowns, what we've got here, is a dockable panel. So let's go ahead and dock that. And here we can create a sketch. So we'll go ahead, placement. I'll have the tube starting here, and we might make it automatically route to here. That looks pretty good. And now we can do the rest of our routes. I might say I've done this too many times because I remember all the numbers. Parallel with edge here, enter distance 4.4. Make that parallel with an yep. Right click here and parallel with edge there, and click there. Now, say that we wanted to finish this route and have it coming down to this port, but we wanted it to intersect. How could we do that? We'll come along to the route button again, start our route from the end point, and here we can pick point snap. So we'll say point snap, pick that edge there, and it will extend that up until it intersects the extension of that line. Come along here, connect that line to that line, throw in a bend, finish the sketch, and now we can populate the route. So no new functions per se, but definitely a better user interface when it comes to the tubing and piping. And of course, when you come to saving it, the defaults that we discussed earlier in the application options, you can change the default namings for each of these pipes. Go ahead and say yes. Lovely. So I'll close that down. And let's look at the next one. So we'll come along to bolted connections. This is actually my favorite change besides dark mode that has come in Inventor 2021. So we'll go ahead and I'll open up this frame, two frame sections, which I've put together, and I've drawn a sketch of the bolted connection that I want to create. Now, tragically, I've talked to so many people about bolted connections, and while they really like the idea of a tool that automatically creates bolted connections for them, lots of people say that it was too clunky to use, or they didn't like the fact that when you created a bolted connection, it would create a subassembly. So I'll show you the default, what it looks like. And for anyone that's new to bolted connection, have a quick look at this awesome tool. So we'll come along to design, and we'll come to bolted connection. And here we've got a design accelerator window. Design accelerators are really interesting. We can create machine components, say for example, gears and drive shaft, and do calculations on them. Generally, people are just interested in this first tab here, which is actually designing it. So we'll come along, placement, and we'll say on point. And here, red cursors in Inventor are inviting us to select things. We'll go ahead and pick the start plane and the points for our bolted connection. So there we go. It's selected all the points in that sketch. And again, red cursors in Inventor are inviting us to select things. We can rotate and pick. We can pick that surface there. Now, so what we have here down below is the thread profile and the choice to pick a size. So I'm going to leave it at 12 millimeters. And here we can, on the right, this is the list that we can use to create the fastener setup. Now, this might look like a title, but it is in fact a button. We can say click to add fastener. And the library is so big, sometimes it times out, and I might have to click it again. We'll see. This is a good problem to have, though, I suppose. We'll say click to add fastener. And there we go. ISO 4814, that'll do. And just with the bolts, we can go ahead and also add in things like washers. So I might go ahead and click add washer. And then we've got the first hole, the second hole. And if you like, you can actually change these. So you can click the 3 ellipses. We want it to be a close hole, for example. Close. Or maybe even threaded. Yeah, the second one we can make threaded. We'll say threaded. And then we'll make a washer and a nut at the end. So we're clicking to add another washer. And a final nut on the end. Lovely. So there we've got our bolted connections. Now I'm going to leave this button using its default selection. So I'll say OK. And it'll go off and it'll make the bolted connection. And this is fantastic because if we look at the parts, it's drilled in the holes into each of the panels, into each of the parts that we're connecting. So there's the regular hole and there's the threaded hole. And it's looking really good. Now, everyone notices this the first time. They create a bolted connection, and it's got a strange quirk about it that it's only really constrained axially to the first hole that you selected. If you ever want to fix this, you can go ahead and you can add in a constraint that will constrain the second hole, and that will fix it into place. But I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to go ahead and edit the bolted connection. Now, once it's created, it's difficult. You need to actually manually promote each of the parts. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. And we're going to create the bolted connection again, but this time I'm going to change something key. So come along here, bolted connection, start plane, points, termination. And if it's quick, I'll do it. If it's not, then I'll just put in one bolt and leave it eventually. Here we go. So a bit quicker that time. I'm not going to go through the whole shebang. But if you click this button here, if you unselect it, what it will do is it will create the bolted connection, but not as a subassembly. It will make them each as individual parts, and best yet, each with their own constraints. How cool is that? Autodesk were very, very on top of it this year. So wonderful. You can control the bomb structure as you like. Preferably, I prefer bomb structures to be like this, where the bolts are on the surface level. But depending on you, you might want to promote it or demote it or whatever it might be. So that's the major change, that the bomb structure in bolted connections can be altered so that you don't have to have a subassembly. So good. Love it. We'll go ahead, save, and close that down. And move on to the next bit. So drawings. Drawings are always one of those things that look really, really simple, but then you get into the nitty gritty and these little things always happen. Oops, wrong part. Let's go ahead and open up this part first. Lovely. So we've got a random component in here. It's largely a revolved profile with a central hole in the middle, and it's got some little PCD-oriented little threaded holes. So what we want to do is make a drawing of this guy. We'll come along here, we'll say open drawing, and here we've got already placed down the views. Now, when it comes to two things, placing down automatic center points and doing dimensions. So we'll come along here. Traditionally, if we wanted to grab the center lines of everything on this view, what we'd have to do is right-click here and say automated center lines, but that's a bit hidden for such a core function. So Autodesk have changed the UI a little bit to be a little more conducive to the work. Here we can come to the Annotate tab, and where we've traditionally done our center marks, we've also got a fifth button now, automated center lines. Fantastic, very logical. We'll click automated center lines, click the view, and as before, we have our dialog for selecting center lines. So let's go ahead. We might choose all hole features and also all cylindrical features and click OK. And there we've got our center marks for everything there. Now let's have a look at doing the diameter. So far, if we come along to dimension, what we can do is we can choose one edge and a second edge, and Inventor is clever enough to know that that's a diameter. And so it places the diameter symbol before the dimension. Very, very useful. Very, very cool. However, what's happened in the past is that people have done section views. So we'll say, come along and say, place views, section, click there, do a quick section view of this guy. They found that while that diameter symbol works for outer diameters, it struggles when it comes to sectioned diameters. However, in 2021, now Inventor is smart enough to realize that that is in fact a diameter, and you don't have to manually override it putting in the diameter symbol. So just these little things help you to get the work done faster and really focus on the things that should take your brain power, like the design and engineering of these products. So lovely, looking good. There is a little bit more to this. I wanted to keep this webinar short and light, but there is a functionality where you can automatically place down front, top, and side views in a template, in a drawing template. And if you, for those of you that are interested in the iLogic, there's a great deal extra tools for drawing automation that have been thrown into iLogic. So another webinar for another day, but I'm very excited to talk about those topics. So we'll go ahead, save, and close that down. This one, I'll confess, I couldn't see the immediate use for, but I'm sure that there is a use for it. Here, what we've got is a part with two drafted edges at different angles. Now, say hypothetically, we've got a drawing and we wanted to place down the dimensions. Now, traditionally, we can place down our dimensions, you know, our horizontal dimensions or our vertical dimensions or horizontal dimensions, or we can have aligned dimensions. However, sometimes it's necessary to have a dimension that's not aligned to the face that it's to the edge that it's dimensioning, but in fact is referencing another edge. So here we'll come along and I'll say dimension, and we'll pick that edge there. And rather than aligning the dimension to that edge, we might say right-click, dimension type, rotated, and pick this edge here. And now that dimension is aligned not to this edge here, but instead to that edge there. Maybe something that would be more useful for, we could say dimension between there and there. And up and up for that, just for corners like that. Okay, so yeah, a little bit niche, but I'm sure lots of you will find uses for that rotated dimension function. So go ahead, save, and close that down. And we might go to the final topic, which is Vault. So let's go ahead and have a look at Vault. What I have here is a very, very special and new function in Autodesk Vault 2021. So in the past, Vault was essentially a big file store, a clever database that would keep track of metadata. And for those of you that are familiar with it, I'll go ahead and open it up. I've got my part here. I'll log into the Vault. Lovely. And what I have here is a box. And the box is very, very unimpressive. It's 16 by 32 by 64. That's X, Y, and Z. So 16 wide, 32 tall, and 64 long. Now, what I'm going to do is check this into Vault. Say, for example, it's a common component. It's an important block. It's an extremely important block to your designs. We'll come along to the Vault. And here, what I'm going to do is check it into the Vault. So there I've got my box, 16 by 32 by 64. Click OK. And what it's done is it's taken a copy and it's thrown it into the Vault here. Here we go. Now, I've set an important new function in Vault. What I can do is come to Tools, Administration, Vault Settings. And what we have here is now the ability to search for duplicates. This isn't a once-off search. This is something that actively happens as you check files into Vault. So the first thing that you need to do to set this up is to configure which folders the duplicate search applies to. I've got it to the top level folder, Designs. So it's going to search the entire Vault for all duplicates at all times. Now we say OK. And OK. Now, say I deal with a lot of common components and I want to avoid duplicates. How do I do that? If you've got everything adequately named and everybody knew everything that was in the Vault, then it would be easy. You'd say we've got this box 16 by 32 by 64. And then I come along another day and design the second box. And geometrically, it's the same. It's a 16 by 32 by 64 millimeter box, but it's differently oriented. Keep an eye on the XYZ. So geometrically, they're the same, but their orientations are different. Now, what I might like to do if I was a workshop manager or something like that, or I was managing drawings, I want to minimize the number of duplicate parts that I'd have in my Vault. Now, if you're really clever, you could do this. You could have file naming schemes that would capture everything about the design, but it's not really realistic to do that. So I'll show you what's going to happen now. I'm going to go ahead and come to Vault and come to the Vault tab here. And here I can click Find Duplicates. What this will do is it will go to the Vault and say, does anything match this part? Am I going to check in another part that's a duplicate of an existing part? So we'll click Find Duplicates and click Search. And wow, there it goes. I know this looks something a bit strange and trivial. It's not trivial, believe me. To be able to find a geometric equivalent with a different name, maybe different materials, to find a duplicate part like that is a massive feat. It's a wonderful new feature. So say, for example, I don't care about the law and I don't care about anything. I'm going to check it in anyway. I'll right click and say check in. And I'm going to throw this duplicate part into Vault. Wonderful. Say that you've already got thousands of components in Vault. So there we've got our 16 by 32 by 64 box and our 64 by 32 by 16 box. So say you've already got thousands of these parts and you've got an engineer in the corner and they're not doing anything, and you say, okay, hey you, I need you to go ahead and find all of the parts in Vault that are duplicates and get rid of the duplicates. So what we can do here is in Vault, come down to the duplicates dashboard. And everything that's been indexed in Vault as duplicates will show up here. So I only have like 3 parts in the Vault. So it's saying that 2/3 of them are duplicates. Terrible. We'll go ahead and we'll come to the 3 ellipses in the corner here and say View Duplicates Report. And what this will do is give us a page-by-page report of all the parts that are duplicate inside your Vault. So we'll come to, there's the first page which shows, numbers, Here you've got the second page, and it will show the offending parts. Now, there's no master part, there's no part that has precedence over another part, so it'll just show you all the parts that are duplicated in Vault. In which case, the person that's in the set to the task of removing the duplicates can go ahead and can find all instances where box 64 by 32 by 16 are used, and perhaps replace it with the box 16 by 32 by 64. This would hopefully help to reduce the file stores and the burden of accounting when it comes to engineering designs and drawings and maintenance of databases. So again, looks very, very simple, but is in fact not, and it's a very, very interesting and very, very good function that they've thrown into Vault. The other one is new functionality when it comes to user permissions. So say, for example, I've got this folder here, and I want to control who's allowed to, view, edit, delete. But there's a new function. We can say details, and let's come to the security tab. And here we can choose object-based security. We can override it. Might say add user groups, and might say this Francisco person, he's allowed to read, and he's allowed to modify, but he's not allowed to delete. And this new feature, download. Am I allowed to download this file? So I can say allow or deny. I might say, okay, he can download that function. So that download feature is very, very interesting. So say, for example, you had drawings on your database in your Vault, and you wanted people to be able to view the drawings, but not be able to download them to their local machine or to their local tablet or whatever function it might be running Vault. This will allow you to control who has what information and who's allowed to go off with the data. So go ahead and click OK, and that's it. And you can see a little padlock because that's a controlled function now. So wonderful. Those are the main things that I wanted to cover in this webinar. All in all, I've been very weary to take on a new year, before any new patches come around. But I have to say, 2021 has really, really impressed me. I haven't been able to see anything that's particularly wrong with it at the moment. So I definitely encourage you to use 2021. If you have any things that you'd like to discuss, let me know. Otherwise, enjoy the software, wash your hands a lot, keep safe over the coming weeks, and we're almost through it, so hang on. All right, thank you for your attention today, and good luck.